Of all the obstacles that prevent your redemption, the most tragic is the one you cultivate with pride. It is the solitary giant. You have learned to carry the burden of your addiction, your grief, and your doubt in secret, believing that self-sufficiency is a virtue. You became a giant of willpower, a pillar of resistance in your community. You refused to ask for help. But under the weight of that burden, the giant is crushing itself. The solitary giant is the final manifestation of the Dominator Ego. It whispers that grace is for the weak. It turns surrender into humiliation. It insists that if you can control your pain alone, you will prove your worth to God. This is the last illusion, the belief that your salvation is an individual project of human engineering. Your refusal to ask for help is not strength. It is the dark secret that is actively destroying communion and preventing the Lord's presence from reaching you. The Logos only operates in mutuality and vulnerability. Addiction and barren grief thrive in isolation. The giant needs a wall to hide behind, and that wall is silence. What if the true measure of your spiritual strength is your courage to kneel and accept that your burden is, in fact, a lie you insist on protecting? If this story is moving you, comment below what minute made you reflect on your life, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next message from God. The solitary giant lives and dies by one word: pride. And pride demands secrecy to maintain the illusion of control. The miracle of confession is the act of radical transparency that kills that pride. Confession is not just about what you did. It is about who you refuse to be in the eternal now. It is the declaration that you will no longer be the solitary giant crushing yourself under the solitary burden. Confession is the practical proof of your surrender. When you confess your struggle, you are publicly committing ego death. You are telling the world and the tyrant of the calendar, my personal story is no longer my identity. My failure is my testimony that I need help. The addiction to self-effort tried to pay for grace with private suffering. Confession accepts grace as an unmerited gift, which only becomes real when shared. Confession breaks the cycle of repetition. When addiction is named and shared, it becomes a cyclic portal for the novelty of communion. You transfer your burden from your exhausted will to the will of the collective body. The mutual grace is activated. McKenna's appeal to find the others understood that consciousness heals in mutuality. Communion is an active transfer of grace. When you confess your solitary burden, you activate the agape love, the Lord's presence, that only flows in mutual vulnerability. The solitary giant dies the moment he finally says, "I cannot do this." The solitary giant hid his wounds, believing the wound is proof of failure. The miracle of confession tore the veil. Now the question is, how does this open wound become your most sacred purpose? Redemption does not remove the scar. It illuminates it. Your wound, the exact point where your self-sufficiency failed and grace entered, is your greatest source of authority. The Logos uses your naked testimony. The solitary giant only respects hierarchical power. The soul, trapped in the dark secret, only respects the authority of the scar. Who is struggling with addiction needs someone who smells of hell, yet stands in the eternal now. The purpose of the open wound is to maintain the channel of grace open for communion. You use your authority of the scar to demonstrate the courage to abandon what you know and how the novelty of the Logos is safer than the old lie. The miracle of confession is the start of your final mission, using your immortality of detachment to bring hope and transparency to the world. You saw the abyss of the cost of non-surrender. Now, turn your eyes back to the eternal now and understand the mission of the light burden. Grace operates by reciprocity and void. The non-surrender is the act of pride that annuls the only condition for grace. You become a closed system that stagnates and dies. The solitary giant's refusal to ask for help destroys the mutual redemption of the others. Your silent suffering becomes a shadow that suffocates hope, proclaiming, "God's grace is not sufficient for my pain." This is the most destructive message the dominator culture can use against faith. The cost of non-surrender is the final proof that pride is the only real enemy. The vitiate and barren grief become infinite in silence. Without the radical transparency of confession, there is no ego death. The solitary giant is condemned to a life of simulacrum, where he is only the shadow of a man, not the transpersonal consciousness the logos intended him to be. You transmutated your pain into purpose through the mission of the light burden. The solitary burden was transformed into the currency of service for the collective body. The detached service is the act of giving that story without the need for compensation. You become a portal of grace for the other, allowing the grace mutua to flow. Your experience with repetition is transformed into a map of escape for those still trapped in the cycle. Ego death is the only guarantee that your service will be light. You are simply making available the grace that saved you. The alegria de Eros, joy of Eros, is the result of your life aligned with purpose. This joy is the proof of your immortality of detachment. You understood the sacred geometry of sharing, the invisible architecture of peace. The solitary giant believed strength came from isolation. The detached service is the act of vigilance that maintains the eternal now and ensures peace. The anxiety and addiction were symptoms of your separation. The Geometria Sagrada reveals that peace does not depend on your maximum control over circumstances. It depends on your surrender and radical transparency within communion. The final mission is to be an anchor in the eternal now, where your individual weight is zero. The service is your shield against the last illusion. You prove your immortality of detachment with every act of donation, because you are acting from the transpersonal consciousness. You walked the path from the solitary giant to the sacred geometry of sharing. You discovered that your salvation was waiting for you to do what seemed impossible for the Dominator Ego. Ask for help. The final plot twist of this journey is not your strength, but the omnipotence of mutual grace sustaining the collective body. The solitary burden was a lie. Redemption is the truth of communion. Your ego death liberated you for detached service, where the joy of Eros becomes the only reward. Your legacy of transparency is your contribution to eternal history. Your calling is to live in the eternal now, anchored in the radical transparency of your confession. I ask you, with the weight of one who finally understood what pure grace is, what is the one thing your pride is still telling you that you must carry alone, and what will be the cost to your soul if you waste this moment of mutual grace?